Greetings everyone! Today I'm going to show you an alternative way to make jewelry with both wire and glass. For this project you will need to have 3 sets of pliers, one that is entirely round, one that is half round, and one that is flat. You'll also want a pair of clippers as well to cut your wire. Here are some examples of the little wire pieces we're going to be making. They are small pieces of wire, 18 gauge or so, that are doubled up on themselves at both ends to make little loops. So first you want to twist the wire, holding it at the base to one side dramatically with your round nose pliers, and then you're going to curl it back on itself in the opposite direction, returning it back to center with those round nose pliers. For my little loops, I kept them the width of the tip of my round nose pliers, and I suggest you do the same so that they don't take up so much space and so that your wires, when you cut them, don't have to be so long. So now I'm going to repeat the process on the other side. And when you're done doing both sides of your little wire, you're going to want to go back with your flat nose pliers and flatten / straighten out those wires so that they're entirely flat. Once you're done with that, you want to put your little wire on your flat piece of granite or whatever kind of metal this is from the metal studio. Get a small hammer from the metal studio and slowly, carefully, so that you don't bump your finger, hammer out at an angle the middle of those wire pieces. Flip it over so that the curve that is created by the hammering is flattened out again. And it doesn't have to be entirely super thin. You just want to flatten out that middle area so that the wire is flat on both sides. This will allow the glass to sit flush on the wire rather than the wire rolling off between the pieces of glass. Again, the goal is not to make the wire thinner, but just flat on both sides. And your wires don't have to be double-sided. Here I am going to make one that is only one-sided, and this is useful for little pendants where you just want a piece of glass hanging down rather than connected on both sides to other pieces. And you'll see that in the example that I show you at the end. So I only make a hoop on one side of this metal, and then I hammer out the extended tip. Just like so. Make sure that you do this motion as perfectly as you can. You don't want to hammer straight down because you'll just dent it in the spot where you've hammered. You want to hit and slide to one side so that you are flattening and smoothing at the same time. Another option that you can do with long double-sided pieces is crossing them over each other so that the pendant that you add to the middle will have 4 conjoining parts. My final option that I have for you all here is a double-sided piece of wire with hoops on either end that is then bent into a V shape so that the pendant itself will be hanging from the bottom of these 2 little hoops. And this really only matters if you want your pendant to be hanging down lower rather than right in the middle of whatever piece you're going to make. It's fun to try out different kinds of shapes and profiles with these beads because inspiration can strike from anything, including just the mechanics behind the glass. So the only difference in hammering out this piece is that you want to get both sides very even, going down to that tip, to that little point, to that angle that you just made, because if one side is slightly off, then the glass will be more inclined to tip to one side or the other. Now that you've hammered out your piece, once again, make sure that it's flat with your flat nose pliers, and don't forget to use your flat nose pliers to even out all sides of your pieces. Moving on to the glass itself, I am going to be using leftover large chunky shock frit. Beneath these chunky pieces of frit, you're going to want to have bases of flat, blank, opaque glass. Making sure that the glass is opaque is very important if you don't want to be able to see the metal between your pieces of glass, as it's going to be essentially the cream in the middle of the Oreo. After I've glued down all of my pieces of base glass, I'm then going to apply my wires to the top of them, making sure that there's enough space between my hoops and the glass that the hoops themselves won't be sucked into the glass. I've had this happen before. Please make sure that there is enough space around your hoops so that the glass doesn't swallow it up. Then I'm going to add my shock frit right on top, and between these passes I am letting the glue dry. I'm using Elmer's glue, and using these little tweezers is definitely very helpful in making sure that you get them just right where you want them to be. As you can see right here, I have two beads. They're both dangling, one with shock frit and one with a bead, and those two are going to be my little experiment pieces because I want to see if it makes a difference. So right away, fresh out of the kiln, we can see that you can still see some of the wire here on these bent wire pieces, and that is probably just a situation where I did not orient my glass low enough on that little curve. And this large piece came out very successful, I think. You can't see the wire on the back side, the hoops are on both sides and visible, so it's really just these two earrings that came out not so great, but you know, this is my first round. And otherwise, I'm very happy with these other beads that have little hoops on either side. This four-sided one came out really sweet. I really like it and dig it. And as you can see here, a couple of these had problems. This small bead here has the wire floating on top, and it's a sharp edge that will be not useful. And from looking at these two green pieces that I put as experiments, I would definitely recommend not using shock frit after all. The shock frit just pinged right off in the kiln and did not fully form a round. Meanwhile, the other one that was already round stayed, so if you want to have more control over your beads, I would definitely recommend cutting them out beforehand. So now I'm going to get some jump rings and take two flat nose pliers, one that's a half round, and as they are already open, I'll show you how to close them. You just wiggle it back and forth. So as you go to design your different jangling jewelry, you can attach them by inserting two loops on the same jump ring and then wiggling them shut, making sure that they stay stiff enough to hold, and there you go. So I'm going to show you what I ended up doing with all of these beads and how I ended up connecting them. Here we have a beautiful necklace that I'm really proud of and really happy with. I ended up joining pretty much all of the beads that came out really nicely that had either 4 connections or 2 connections. Here's the necklace that I created out of my larger pink piece. I did double large rings and single small rings for the chain, and here are the earrings that I made out of those little smaller pink and green pieces. So in total, they make a very nice set, and I am happy with the process and the progress and the end project.